And he made this phenomenal film. My question number one is, what inspired you to do a film about Trayvon Martin, kind of, sort of, really, but and how did you approach telling his story?
The truth of the matter is, I started working on a Black History show many years ago. I was a teacher at the world famous Duke Ellington School of the Arts in Washington, D.C. And for many years, I produced a Black History show with my students as a way to reinforce our history. As we know, it's currently being legislated literally out of classrooms. But for years, we had been doing a Black History show, making money that way. We would go all over the city to big government agencies and that kind of thing, and they would pay money for me to bring our students to see our Black History show. In 2012, when Trayvon Martin was killed, I was outraged. I am from South Florida. I said this at the premiere that we had a few weeks ago. I don't usually tell stories that make me look bad, but I used to smoke cigarettes for years. And my parents live in a gated community, not unlike the one where Trayvon Martin was killed. And many nights I'd be out with my mom at Christmas time, and of course she would die if she knew I was smoking cigarettes. So 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, I'd be out in our neighborhood, walking around, puffing away. When Trayvon Martin was killed, I realized what danger I was really in. And I don't like to be hot, but I found myself that summer one of the many people that were protesting in the streets because I was so outraged by what had happened. I asked Stephen A. Butler Jr., who is the screenwriter, to create something about Trayvon Martin to put in our Black History show that I was doing with my students. And that is what you see now. It's what it evolved into. And I'm so proud to say that one of my students from Duke Ellington is really the cinematographer and the editor, Andre Strong, is how it became a film. That would not have happened without Andre, who was sitting in the audience. But that really is how organically it evolved. We've run the only Black-owned and operated professional theater company in DC for 20 years. We've done lots of different shows about lots of different things. But this one wasn't about necessarily a story that we wanted to tell. It's a story that's gotta be told. And the last thing I'll say about this is, I showed I went to Howard, HU, I went to Howard University. One of my dear classmates, we lost one of our classmates earlier this year, and I sent a friend of mine the trailer for Veils. Her daughter is a freshman at Howard this fall. She's 18. She shows her daughter the trailer. Her daughter says, "Mommy, who's Trayvon Martin?" Now, when you think about it, it sounds horrible, but when you think about it, if she's 6 years old when Trayvon Martin was killed, she may not know who that is. So you gotta make a record so that years from now, when someone is researching, when someone does discover the story of Trayvon Martin, that they're clear that he had Skittles and iced tea as his only weapons. He was not a menace. He was not doing anything other than minding his own business when his Blackness presented as a threat. I want to make sure that when we talk about what happened to Trayvon, and he's just one story, so many of the others that have been equally horrible, but that when people remember Trayvon Martin, they remember the truth of his story.
Well, he answered all the questions. Oh my gosh, you're just giving me chills. You're phenomenal. Did you work closely with any of Trayvon Martin's family?
We've talked with his family. I discovered on this journey that we're almost related. My uncle by marriage is, I share a relative. Trayvon Martin's father and my uncle's son, they're brothers. It kind of makes sense, but we sort of are related. I talked to them. They don't want to fully engage. My stepfather was actually Trayvon Martin's father's mentor, and they know what we're doing. His mother, they asked for us to submit to them officially. We've done all of that. We have kept her abreast at every step of this, but I think the full engagement into this trauma, this is difficult. I would tell audiences when we were doing the live show, because remember, this was a play. I would have to tell the audience, we'd get to intermission, and there'd be silence. And so I'd come out and give a curtain speech and say, I realize we don't know what to do. Because you don't feel like you should applaud. But we are in this collective grief. I can only imagine what that grief is like for her. So while we would love to have her fully engaged, I've spoken to Ben Crump, who was their attorney. I've known Ben Crump since I was 13. I'm from Florida. I've tried to engage them, but they've kept a protective barrier that I understand, if that makes sense.
Definitely, I can fully understand why. My last question before we open it up to questions and answers, did you face any pushback or challenges in bringing this film production, considering the political changes in the subject matter?
Because rather than wait for a green light from anybody, we have produced this ourselves. So the pushback, not really, because who's gonna push back? We have created this from scratch by ourselves. Everything from the soundtrack, the score, literally everything. So not a lot of pushback. In fact, as we have engaged, for example, with the family of Viola Liuzzo, the white woman whose story we tell at the end of this piece. When I first reached out to the Liuzzo family, first Sally Liuzzo, who was 6 years old when her mother was murdered. You hear that detail about the kids being called, their mother being called nigger lover after their mother is killed. Sally told me, she's in first grade. Sarah, who was her mom's friend in real life, walking her to school, that her mom was being called a nigger lover. This was her first day back after being out of school for a week because her mother's been shot in the head. That kind of detail could only have emerged from the engagement, not pushback, the engagement of some of the folks that we talked about here. Mary Liuzzo, the oldest Liuzzo child, was 17 when her mom was killed. When we first started talking about Viola, we had her lighter, a little, not as much of a revolutionary, like this was just some random thought. And Mary's like, no, my mom really was a revolutionary. She was 40 years old, but was back in college because she had things that she wanted to accomplish. And she was just herself so outraged by what she had seen in Selma that Mary wasn't surprised that her mom got up and just went to Selma. That's who she was as a person. That was not pushback, but engagement. There has been lots of that. Because, we know in the African tradition, our job is to be the one to preserve the stories.
Amen.
And I find that, as we did the show live, you'd have audience members say, oh, I'm from Selma. This happened, and this person is still alive who can talk about this. We gotta get these stories. We realize now that going to 60s is now 60 plus years ago. And many of these folks who we seek to highlight, they're going to be lost to history if we don't do our jobs now to make sure we're getting those stories, we're writing them down, we're putting them in film, or whatever mechanism that we can use to ensure that our stories are kept. Last thing I'll say, it's a challenge and we should have these seats filled, especially by young people. These seats have got to be filled. I'm a little boy who grew up, you can clap for that because it's true. I'm a little boy who grew up at my great-grandmother's seat. My great-grandmother was born in 1905. My grandmother would tell me when she was a girl, they would put the dining room chairs from the house on the back of the horse and buggy to go to church on Sunday. Now this is a woman who didn't have her first television until she was in her 50s. But she lived to be 99. And when I was 29. So I learned a great deal from listening to my grandmother and her friends. We gotta make sure that young people are getting our stories, they're getting our history. If not us, who? Because it's gonna be left, I'm from Florida, to Ron DeSantis. It's gonna be left to Ted Cruz, if you're in Texas, to decide what part of our history is preserved. I'm offended by that idea, and I'm gonna do my job, and I encourage everybody in this room to do the same.
Amen. Preservation is extremely necessary. Before we close out our questions and answers, does anybody have any questions that they would like to talk to Courtney? We have somebody who has a microphone. John, could you make sure it's on?
Hi. I have a couple of questions. The first one is, what exactly was I supposed to learn from what was I supposed to learn from this? And secondly, I noticed that it is very Christian leaning. However, one of the Orishas showed up. And I don't understand that.
It's a good question. I'm going to answer the second question first. I was challenged with this question by a professor of Haitian religion. Am I saying that correctly? Yoruba. About the Yoruba, she's a professor in the Yoruba tradition. It's an interesting question because, as she explained it to me, it would not be unusual for Sabrina being a Christian woman, even though she's reached out to by this Orisha, that Orisha would reach out to her in the way that she could receive it. And for me, I understand that I'm Christian, so if you hear the Christian stuff in there, probably because I'm a Christian, and so I wrote these songs, I'm a Christian. However, I intellectually I understand that the religion that I carry is the one that was given to me, that it is not the religion of my African ancestors. I'm clear about that. And so I am walking this kind of a tightrope between what I was taught and believe and what I intellectually understand and also believe. And I think that for most Black folks, because most of us, the only faith that we have been given is the faith of our parents and our grandparents, that is Jesus. And I don't want to going, I think, too far in the opposite direction and not having it be structured in some kind of faith, and some kind of Christian faith, I think would be difficult for a lot of people to wrap their minds around, because I've been challenged by folks who are strictly Christian, who don't understand why the African Orisha piece is in there at all. So it is in an effort to ensure that as many people as possible can take in these stories. And I don't know that that's the best answer, but that's the best answer I have. What do I want you to take away? Our history is living.
No, what was it specifically, was I supposed to learn from this? What am I?
What you're supposed to learn, or in my words, what I'd like for you to take away, is that this grief that we see happening on television, from these various murders, this police brutality, that it's a continuum, that it didn't just start, that we started this Black Lives Matters hashtag in response to a 21st century problem. But this is not a 21st century problem. This is a problem that goes back at least 400 years, right? And in the 20th century was an epidemic. I taught a class called Harlem Renaissance, for example, where we talked about the Red Summer of 1919, where 1,500 people were lynched, right? That doesn't seem real, but the difference between the summer of 1919 and the summer of 2020 is a difference only of degree. And so I hope that what people get is this isn't new, and unless we get serious about challenging some of these power structures that exist, unless we get serious about voting, because Viola Liuzzo went to Selma to encourage people to vote. That was about the Voting Rights Act. And we gotta get out of our need to be purists about lots of things, because we have a generation of people that are younger than us who are talking about not voting. With all that's on the line today, many of them are talking about not voting, not understanding what's been fought for, what's been sacrificed to have us here. So I hope that what people take away, what I want them to learn, is that there is bloodshed so that we can enjoy what we have now. And that unless we keep fighting for it, it will be lost. It can be lost just like that.
Amen.
Amen.
Wow.